Hello. Today I'm proud to host Father Tony Melton, a Christ the King Anglican in near Atlanta, Georgia. He's with the Reformed Episcopal Church, and he's a serial, or at least a church planter, and perhaps a chronic church planter, as we would say. And we're going to talk about his motto, "Always be gathering," which he believes is important for any church planter and perhaps for other churches as well. So, Father Tony, when did you move to Atlanta with Andy?
We arrived here in July of 2019.
How big was your family then?
We had three kids at the time, and but she was pregnant with our fourth when we moved, and now we have five.
And I heard you have a family motto.
Yes, yeah, it's actually right behind me. We used to say it when we arrived, but we used to say I would call out to our kids, "We are," and they'd respond, "Church planners." They were younger at the time and thought that that was really cool, and I thought it was just such a thing of the past since now I have teenagers, but my 12-year-old actually got all the younger ones to draw these signs and put them up in my office. So it's still alive somewhere deep in the back of their minds. But yeah, it's been a good journey for us as a family. Not just good for the kingdom, I think, but good for my kids.
And when you were doing your curacy, were you thinking about church planning at the time?
Yeah, I was at the Chapel of the Cross in Dallas, which is Bishop John Bonesire's is the rector there, and I served under him for 10 and a half years. Amazing, amazing formation. I think he's the best priest maker in the Anglican Church right now. But I was the headmaster at the parochial school, St. Timothy's, and that was a school plant, and I really enjoyed helping him plant that school. And around the same time, Bishop Sutton started REC 100, and I was in the room whenever he announced, the goal to plant 100 churches. And as a young man, I just that really caught my imagination, and it kind of simmered in my heart for years while I was helping plant St. Timothy's. So was really excited to try a church plant.
And one of the sayings that we have out west is that healthy churches plant healthy churches.
Mm.
And so what aspects of St. Timothy's, of St. Chapel of the
Yeah.
Cross um, have you either intentionally or unintentionally brought to Atlanta with Christ the King?
Well, Chapel of the Cross is just such a healthy parish on so many levels. I mean, I think I they gave me my rule of life. I mean, I prayed morning and evening prayer with my students, sung matins and sung evensong every single day. I kept the prayer book calendar. Um, and if that rule of life forms you within the context of discipleship and local mission, over time you just find yourself to be a prayerful missionary. And Bishop John, on my first summer as a deacon, I think saw something in me that was an evangelist. And so my first church side hire was to knock on every single door within 6 blocks radius of the church. It took me all summer in Cassock in the heat,
Of
and I
Dallas.
talked to hundreds of people. And I think just the combination of just keeping the rule and focusing on discipling my parishioners, which are my students, but also reaching out to my neighbors was the best training I could have had for a church planner. But yeah, all Father Michael Vincent and Rockwall planted out of Chapel of the Cross. I planted out of Chapel of the Cross. It's a great Benedictine style church that's planted, and sent out people from there.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to our topic today, which is I understand that. Well, I you and I taught a class together a year ago at Cranmer House with Father Vincent, um, and we're going to do it again in January.
Yeah, I
And,
can't wait.
I was really struck in that class that you had a phrase, "Always be gathering."
Yeah.
And sounds like that's very perhaps informed by your experience pounding the pavement around Chapel of the Cross. But tell me a little bit about first what does the phrase actually mean?
Well, it has a meaning, I think, for church planters, and then I think for me it also has a meaning for priests in general. Um, I think for church planters, there's a constant temptation to not act your age.
What is it first for our audience who has not heard the phrase before? What are you calling people to do when you say always be gathering?
It's a mode of being to where you're always trying to bring people that are not within the church into the church. It would not be improper to say that it's an evangelical phrase, although uh, I think evangelicalism is such a broad, hackneyed term, obviously. So, uh, but I do think that it's this disposition of the heart that they are not yet in the room. They're not in the church. And I, as a priest, well, this is getting ahead of what it means for every priest. I, as a priest, have the ministry of reconciliation, and I will be judged unless I go out and compel them to come in and figure out what it's going to take in this moment to be a persuader of men to join the church and women.
So you're basically becoming a fish instead of fishers of fish, but a fishers of men. And
Mhm.
perhaps another term, a little bit less loaded, would be always be evangelizing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that it's a message that the the classic sacramentally minded Anglo-Catholic Anglicans need to hear. It's a message that the REC needed to hear, and I think that they've heard it. It's become a very helpful term to call priests to action. It's very easy to reside within the sacramental ministry of the church within the confines of our buildings. And I love the Oxford movement, and the Oxford movement took the sacramental life of the church into the places in England that it was not yet, and it was a very bold movement. I think there's a big difference between the Oxford movement and the ritualist movement that's in America. And uh, oh how oh how I wish we could return to the fervor for the ministry of reconciliation that those early men had.
Well,
But it's also a church planting slogan as well, and it has a slightly different meaning there.
yeah. So in the context of church planting, then why is this so important?
I think it has a doubly important meaning in church planting, and that's just because in church planting, planters frequently forget what phase they're in. I think there's a
What are the five phases that you would classify or recommend people to?
well, I mean, I've kind of coined a five G's, phases. There's other phases,
Mhm.
way that guys split it up. Mine are germinate, gather, galvanize, gear up, and go. It's probably worth all of the criticism that it could get, but it tries to sequence a plant in ways that I've found effective. But there's just a temptation when you're planting a church to kind of be a provider of services to the people that are already in the room. So many planters, for instance, when it's time to make their first hire, it's so exciting. Their first thought is, I need to hire a children's minister or a music director or an administrative assistant. And I coach planters, and I'm always like, no, don't do that. Keep gathering. Your job is to plant a parish, and parish status is not all numbers and finances, but it has that to do with it. And your job is to plant a parish, which means you need to keep gathering into the parish. Parishes serve the poor.
Well,
Parish,
certainly parishes are self-supporting and are stable enough on which to build other things.
yes, and I think our imagination for what a parish actually is so low. For
Really?
us at Christ the King, a parish, we don't even become a parish until we're ready to plant another church. We had I think we had like 140 on an average Sunday before we even became a parish. Now, I'm not saying that that should be the case. Different jurisdictions have different numbers, but a parish isn't just a minimum. A parish is something that can have almost a different mode of being within the kingdom. And until you get to a place where you can be perpetually vital, then your job is to always be gathering. I think that's what I'm always, that's why I use that phrase within the church planting class. It's just don't get distracted while you're planting the church. Uh, there's so many things to distract you, but always be gathering.
And obviously you talked about um, the responsibility of a priest to do this. You've talked about the vitality of the mission or the parish to do this. But just from a practical standpoint of a church planter, you want to be a successful church planter. Why is it important to be always be gathering?
Well, I think there's the practical reality that if you kind of switch modes to being a chaplain to a small group of people, you just won't survive. And I think that it's just a practical reality that I think it gestures towards a spiritual reality. I don't think it's a mere practical note, but that's a big part of it. Um, uh, but I also think that there's a spiritual reality here. I think, I think of the nobleman that was throwing the feast.
Mm-hmm.
He there wasn't enough people in the room, and so he didn't start the feast, which, as we know, is the Eucharist. He said, "Hold, I want everyone to leave, and I want you to go gather in the highways and byways and fill my house, and then we will start the feast." Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be having the Eucharist while you're planting the church, but there's an aspect that so many churches have this idea that if we just simply had the service and we totally took our mind off of gathering, then people will come. And I find that's not only biblically inaccurate, but it's also like societally out of touch. We just don't know what time it is. We're in post-Christendom. We're on the
Right.
backside of the Great Dechurching, which is the most significant religious shift in American history for certain.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, a broader thing, but you just can't hold your shingle out and expect a service to attract. You have to go out and persuade people to come into the church. Always be gathering. So that's the context for church planting.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as the let's say you're the only clergyman initially, what are the practical implications of always be gathering? What's it do to your work, your day, or your week to always be gathering?
Well, in the gathering phase, which I know we haven't explained the 5 Gs yet, but the
Why don't you
gathering phase.
explain the 5 Gs right now, or where gathering sits within the other phases?
So the first one would be germinate, and that's just where you get everything set up that needs to be set up before you kind of hit the ground tactically as a church planter. That's, do you have your fundraise, your funds raised? Do you have your bishop, on board? Have you been assessed by a church planting, body? Have you been trained by a church planting expert? Do you have a coach? Do you have a spiritual director? Do you have a rule of life? Is your marriage healthy? All that. Do you know what you want to, do you know what your strategy is? That's germinate. When you hit the ground, you kind of move into the second phase, which is gather. And gathering is, it has three components. You're networking like crazy. There's a conversations goal that's over all of it. For me, it was 500 conversations about the church plant in the first 3 months. Um, the conversation counts as you learned something about them, they heard about the church plant, and it lasted longer than 3 minutes. That you can change those. Those were mine. And the way you accomplish those conversations is you network, you have incarnational ministry, which is just you're out and about, in your cassock, in your coffee shop, officing, coaching baseball, whatever it is that you do. And then the other is gathering events. We did Theology on Tap. I think that's kind of a silver bullet in this moment, but um, there's obviously other gathering events that you can do, front porch ministries, whatever you call them. But the goal is you're trying to have this huge network of connections where people become friends and, they know of your church plant. And at the same time, you're trying to cultivate a pre-committed group. And then in the galvanize phase, you're trying to take that network and solidify them into a launch team that has sharedness all about it. Shared culture, shared convictions, shared commitments, shared vision for what type of church they want to plant. That you're really trying to galvanize the group together as an identity. And then the fourth phase is gear up, where you're actually taking that group and you're gearing up for a Sunday public service. And then the last phase is run a Sunday service.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So gathering is really when the first part of gathering is when you know where you are and what you want to do, and then you start networking out in the community to bring people in.
That's right. And I think, the phrase we're discussing is always be gathering, and yet there's one phase that's called gathering, but you're gathering the whole time. And I think that's one of the tricks of church planning is you never stop gathering, especially until I don't think you should ever stop gathering, but it has to become a priority during the whole course of the church plant. So you asked what practical implications this has. Simply having a dedicated time to just gather is a very rare thing I've found in the kind of the traditional wing of the Anglican spectrum. I wish there wasn't so big a spectrum, but we have to talk spectrums. It's more often the case that I find that guys go and they'll start, praying the daily office with a group, which I love. I mean, I pray the daily office every day. Or they'll start like a homeschool co-op, or they'll start something that's kind of circled and they're not casting a wide network. Or they'll start services right off the bat. I've kind of come in on the back end to coach church planters that you started your Sunday service with 8 people. Okay, don't do that. Like have a time. Bishop Jones, Chad Jones, incubated our church plant in the REC. The APA incubated our church plant for 6-7 months while we were gathering so that I could have the Eucharist and feed my soul while I was casting this network. And that's what I'm saying for the gathering phase is have a dedicated time for gathering. That's the first practical implication.
But so you don't have a dedicated time for gathering now, 7 years later, 6 years later?
I think the way that it impacts parishes is that you just always have a heart for those that are outside the kingdom, and that you always have a program for it too, a heart and a program. So sometimes I'll talk to parishes that are really established, and they've got paid choir, they've got multiple staff, they're funding buildings, and I'm like, tell me what you guys are doing to reach those that are recently de-churched, which there are millions.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Oh, but surely you guys are doing nothing. And that's way more common than people think. And, they'll say, well, we have like a men's Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Do you think that someone that's not gone to church for 6 years is going to go to a men's Bible? That's not the time we're in. You actually have to go to them, some sort of front porch, third space ministry. And so I would just say for parishes, it means that there should always be a focused funded attempt at being very, very strategic and persuasive to reach a certain demographic in a way that brings them into the church.
And how big is your staff now?
We have with three full-time. We just lost a full-time person because they just planted a church out from us. So now we have three full-time and a few part-time.
And those are all ordained clergy?
No, our three full-time are priests, and one of our part-time is a priest. Another one is a lay person. Yeah.
And of those five people, who gathers?
Well, in a way, we all do. I encourage all our staff, for instance, to find a day of the week where they're officing outside of the church and to meet people while they're officing. I'm That's my charism and gifting at our church, and so if there's a gathering ministry, I typically lead it. But I coach a lot of church planners that's not their gifting, and so I tell them to go hire that person and deploy them and fund them to go run, some sort of ministry.
And you've talked about being out in the community, networking, a lot of one-on-one stuff. What other sort of activities would support a vision of always be gathering?
Um, I mean, the simplest thing would be take 3 hours out of your week, all the priests listening to this in parishes, and go knock on as many doors as the Lord would have you knock on that day within some area of your parish geographic unit, and just see what the Lord does. And in between each house, pray that the Lord would open the hearts of those that you're going to talk to next. And don't go in until you have at least one good conversation about them and the church and about Christ. And do that every week. And that's gathering. Uh,
Well, that we had actually had a video on continuing forward by Bishop Paul Hewitt,
mm,
and he's that's part of what he calls kingdom thinking, which
yes.
is you're expanding the kingdom of God, and so you're doing it by going door to door. And he's talking about when he did as a priest in the 80s and the 90s, but you say in suburban Atlanta it still works today.
It can't not work. You'll get more rejection than you had in the 80s and the 90s. You'll have more people think that you're Fruit Loops and weird and slam the door in your face. You'll make way more enemies for your church, but you'll also make friends. And you don't need to mind the enemies. Even Jesus said that you'll be hated by the world. I find that a lot of priests just need to be prodded into being uncomfortable. It's easy to be comfortable, and to situate yourself where there's very little risk of rejection and awkwardness. But I've just seen the Lord work when you put yourself in people's spheres that are so far from the church. And maybe it's one out of every 20 conversations that even has anything good about it. You just had a conversation with someone that hadn't thought about God in a week or a month or a year. So, I mean, then there's also just programs. I mean, like I said,
But
Theology on Tap is a good one. We ran Alpha. Alpha is its own unique thing. It's from a very evangelical parish. It's kind of charismatic. We had to clip a lot of the videos that we were like, there's no way we're going to be talking about that with people. So we only did about 65% of it. It was amazing. The 65 that we did was so good. And we were able to tailor our own unique, sacramental message through it. But it just got people talking about God and religion. And it was good for our people. And we had adults baptized and come back to the faith, and it bore fruit. So that's an example.
So, other than explicit front porch ministries, which, or you, as you called it, a third space, a place where you can meet people and invite people that's not sitting in the pews on Sunday morning. But suppose somebody does show up on Sunday morning that you met in a coffee shop 2 weeks ago, or you've seen at baseball practice for the last 2 years. What is happening at the church when they show themselves for the first time that will follow up on planting the seed that you've tried to plant in their hearts?
There's a one of the most important systems for every parish to have is an enfolding system. Sometimes it's called an assimilation system. Um, and it's basically taking a visitor all the way to a confirmed member.
Okay, but even before that, what happens on the first day they show up?
So, yeah, I mean, your greeter team is one of the most important parts of your assimilation system. And so like, we often will encourage our greeter team to reflect on the story of the prodigal son and the father who's waiting on the porch for someone to come back, and he ran out to meet him. And so we have greeters that are in the parking lot. They're literally bringing them, to the front. They're talking to them at the front. They're taking them to their seat. It's if you're actually always be gathering, it means that you're always thinking about this ministry of reconciliation and the amount of shame and distance that people are carrying in this de-churched environment that we're finding ourselves in, and giving a crap about how they're actually going to get from there to the bosom of God. And if you have that as a priority, then it will be unthinkable to have a moment of shame or confusion that's a normal part of your church. Like, it would just be like, well, obviously we would never let a visitor feel out of place. We're going to sit next to them and walk them through the liturgy. We're going to, I really love having a hymnal and a prayer book and a Bible when I worship, but we print out our bulletins. I don't ever want someone coming to our church and feeling lost. And if someone knows the liturgy super well, we have the prayer book and the hymnal right in the pew. But our heart is for a ministry of reconciliation. Is that what you wanted?
Mm-hmm. Do you generally end up talking to somebody coming for the first time, or you or one of the other clergy?
Every time. So, right before the service, we pray early, and then I go back up so that in the 10 minutes before the liturgy starts, I can go up to someone who's in the pew and whisper, "I don't think I've met you before. Is this your first time? Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I hope you stay after. I'd love to talk to you." Our greeters are trained to go up to every single person and offer to sit with them or have someone sit with them, ask them what tradition they're from, whether this will be new to them, try to get them oriented to the liturgy. A lot of pre-work. And that's one of the reasons why we try to start in the parking lot, is so that we have time to learn their story by the time they get to the door, so we know how to be hospitable to them. And then after service, we trap them, and there's a line to say hello.
What is the experience after service?
Well, we've been described as the golden retrievers of Anglican churches. So it's just, there's a bunch of people that are just kind of like, I'm really excited to talk to you. And that took years to train. We used to have slogans it's so hokey, and I had to cringe as a priest, but we used to get up for, I think it was like 4 months, and we would have a slogan during announcements of, we call it adoptive parishes, and then they would respond, celebrate new friends and new saints. Hokey, but they got it in their heads. Or adoptive parishes have open calendars and big tables, because I was noticing that we weren't having this dynamic where, oh, this person is coming to our community and wants to connect. Let us have them over for dinner. Let's have a table that can fit a whole other family. A great statistic to interview your church is how many what's the average number of chairs in each household? Just a That's a good thing to know. Make a goal to double it, you know. Anyway, little tangent.
Um, and you talked about going out with the cassock in the community, and at the same time, the greeters, the laity, are greeting people who are coming in. What other roles can the laity play, either um, once you've already launched on Sunday morning or even before Sunday morning? Because obviously, if I or another layperson is sitting in a coffee shop without the spiffy collar, people won't say, what is that? Are you a celibate Catholic priest? So it's not the conversation starter, but what role can the laity play to support or even in anticipation of a full-time church planter?
It's harder. I'll start with that. A priest has so many more advantages of creating spiritual conversations because they're a public, man of God. But Epiphany is a good season to focus on evangelism. So two things there. We always ask people to think of a few people that they're going to pray for during Epiphany, and also make some attempt to invite them to church. So one of the phrases that's helpful for talking to laity about this is just called elbow evangelism. It's so intimidating to talk to people about the gospel. It's nuanced. You have to read where they're coming from. It's sensitive. Do you go into apologetics, or you just can't stay relational? We go to school for a long time to be experts at this. We get a lot of practice because we wear clothes that invite the practice. But everyone can invite someone to church. And if there's a book that I'd recommend, I don't have it within arm's reach, I don't think, but it's called The Great Dechurching. It's right here. Right here. Great Dechurching.
We did it. We did a continuing forward video on that, and you were one of
Yes.
the guests, and so I will link to that.
Yeah. But one of the things they point out is most people in this culture are not so antagonistic towards the church as you think. If you just invite them, they will come. I think it's over 50% of people will come if you invite them. And so elbow evangelism is a phrase that we use during Epiphany. Pray for them and muster up the courage and opportunity to invite them to something, not necessarily the liturgy. Our ideal path into the church is not liturgy first. I would much prefer them be at the pub with me at Theology on Tap, or at my house, or at their house, or something before they come to the liturgy. But inviting them to church is good too.
So in some ways, you want to create the sense of belonging before you ask them to join in the worship service if they're not already inclined to worship.
That's right. Yeah, a good friend of mine, Father Michael Vincent, has a great phrase that I think is worth remembering. It's belong, believe, become. And it's this idea, it gets it from the Celtic way of evangelism, I think, but this idea that you can be a part of us before you even believe like us. And it's just to say that it's a way of saying we're not Cartesian, we're Trinitarian. We're relational beings that oftentimes we find our humanity even in relationship, and then we find out what we think about it later.
Thank you. You mentioned that you've talked to established churches and are a little surprised that they don't have an explicitly gathering ministry. So what would be your recommendation, say, for a typical Anglican church today is probably a Sunday attendance of 50 to 100, 120, something like that. So what would you recommend for the rector of a parish like that in terms of how to apply always be gathering to what they're doing, or to shift their focus within their existing church?
Well, I'll probably say something scary here. There's a phrase that always forward Molly Ruck is the leader of Always Forward. She's my coach, and I have great respect for her. She had a rallying cry earlier last year that says, "Every church a mother, every church a mother."
Mhm.
I love that. So maybe like a little step would be start a theology on tap. But I think that actually what I would like to say is if you have over 75 people, uh, I believe that it is your bounden duty to bring on a church planting curate. One, name an area within a a probably 25-minute to 35-minute radius of your parish. Pick a community that you would like to plant a church in. Train up this man to be a good priest, and then help him plant a church and give him anywhere from 4 to 15 households out of your church.
And it's in a mother-daughter church plant like that. Are you financially supporting the church plant when they're being sent out into that mission field?
Yeah. And the Lord will bless it. You know, uh, I've just seen that time and again. That's such a scary strategy. Like how would we lose the families? How would we fund the position? Um, but look at the New Testament church. That's what they did. They were bringing up future church planters and they were sending them out, and the Lord provided. And whenever a church struggled, it allowed the other parts of the church to come around them. And the Lord solves financial problems and logistical problems to those who step out in faith, in wisdom. You don't do this without, good coaching and good guidance from people that know how to do this. But in general, I think that every church that's even above 50, has a bounden duty to either bring in a curate and plant a daughter church, and if they can't for a few reasons, partner with someone who can and help them do it. Always be gathering.
Well, and this is the saying I think our mutual friend Lee Nelson once said, which is healthy churches plant healthy churches.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a chicken or the egg. If you're not healthy, is it because you haven't been planting a church?
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue to talk about incarnation. You have you lived this out in your own experience as the rector of Christ the King?
I have tried. So we planted in 2019, and that was a parachute drop plant. So I had a couple families that joined me on our first, our when we landed, which is a blessing. But it wasn't like there was a launch team. So we spent, from July all the way to January gathering a launch team, and then we set to start a soft launch, which was kind of a non-publicly advertised Sunday service in March of 2020, which ended up being 4 days after COVID hit. There's a lot there. We'll skip past it. But the story that you're asking about is since planting our church, which we count as one, we're working on our fifth church plant since then. And that's going to be another daughter church. So we've sent out.
Yeah, give us 2, 3, and 4 then.
Yeah, so the second one was we brought in a curate, Jesse Barkalow, for a 5-month curacy, I believe. He's from Colorado. We moved him to Atlanta, trained him for 5 months, helped him establish his launch team by flying him back every couple weeks to Colorado Springs. And whenever we sent him back, he was trained and he had a launch team of, I think, 50 people when he landed. So that was just kind of a creative, we couldn't do a daughter church. We had barely started Sunday services when we did that, but that was our first big time hire, was someone that we were planning to train up and send out, there was hardly even a moment where he knew enough of our thing to be a help to us. It was a giving away. He was Jesse is always a help, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
And then the next hire we had was for Father Spencer Amaral, and that was our first daughter church plant. So we had announced that we were planning to plant a daughter church 30 minutes north of us before we started Sunday services at our church plant. So in a way, we say we planted pregnant. And so eventually we became enough sustainable enough to bring on a church planter. He had a 2-year curacy, and then we sent him off to start a daughter church, and he took about 65 of our members with us and or with him, and they're doing so good. It's a great joy. I enjoy being a grandfather. I'm only 39, but of seeing our daughter, a mother, maybe would be a better way, a mother church, and seeing our daughter church do amazing things, greater things than we have done. It's the
By the way,
greatest pleasure.
you said you sent 65 people. A lot of rectors would have a heart attack at that possibility. So how big were you the day before they left, and how big were you the day after, and where are you now?
That's an interesting story. So we were averaging 220 at the time, and we sent about 65 people out. That next the 2 weeks after that, we had our biggest group attrition that we've had since planting, and 5 huge families, many children, all left at the same time. They were, yeah, well,
Anyway,
I'll have to get into it, but all of a sudden, what we thought was going to be a 65-person drop, which was already huge, ended up being about 100-person drop, maybe a little bit more than that actually, and that hurt. Um, so we went from about 220 to about 110, 115 in about a month. And yeah, that was scary. But to anyone who's at that sort of 100 mark, you don't have to send off 65 people. That was our great joy. But you can send off 4 families. You can send off 5 families. It doesn't. It's not about the numbers, but what we learned was that we have only ever grown as a church substantially when we were in the act of planting a church. If you look at our growth rates, if we're not like training up a curate with a motion to send them out, we just stay at the same numbers. It's great. I don't mind that. We enjoy our life together, but it's interesting that it's only after we say we would like to plant over here, or we are going to hire a planting curate to raise them up. It's only when we're in one of those 2 modes that we ever grow.
wow.
Yeah. And we've, and when I say grow, it's like the Lord fills the hole left numerically, not in your heart. I mean, they cried when Paul left, and we cried whenever when our Canton group left. I mean, we missed them terribly. So,
And how has this, the people who have been with you for 4 or 5 years, how has this act of putting resources into training the leaders of the next church and sending families away and all this focus on not just the people within your parish, but evangelizing another community half an hour away or wherever it might be, 10 states away? How has that affected their view as a parishioner, as a Christian, as an Anglican, as a member of Christ the King?
I think it's made them holy if they stay. There's people that have been trained for decades to be consumers, that need to have things neat, tidy, or quiet. That need their priest to be their chaplain. and they don't get that in a church that's planting their fifth church in 5 years. It's not to say that we're negligent. I mean, I think that if you were to talk to people, you know, there's what 40 people right now getting regular spiritual direction and confession, and like we're present with them. It's just that they all know what rises to the level of involving their clergy because they know that we're planting a church. And I think that we've had people leave because of that, because they wanted us to be a little bit more available, I guess, for just chatting. I typically don't chat with our parishioners, and they kind of know that that's not because I don't love them. Um,
You have other priests that do chat with them?
sure, yeah. I mean,
Because in
different
a
priests
big
have
parish,
different.
not everybody gets to talk to the rector anyway. I mean, whether you're a church planting parish or not.
Yeah, I don't think they ever experienced me as cold. It's,
Mhm.
I think, they just know that the clergy are there for the cure of souls and the planting of churches. That's what they do. Um, and so, but yeah, so I think like all that to say, I think we've lost those that have been spoiled by consumerism, but the people that have stayed, which is the majority of people, uh, the only way they truly find themselves is by giving themselves away. It's the only way to make someone holy is to become not selfish and to actually cultivate over time a care for the people that are not yet in the room is a great way to teach them how to pray and teach them how to think of their life with God. And it's been amazing. I think yeah, I'm biased, but I think we have the best parishioners in the world. But I think a lot of it is because we've been planting churches. They also fall in love with curates so deeply. They that's a hidden gem. It's these curates that come in, they're green, but they're lovable. And your people develop this such an appreciation for the joy of sending men off into the world to bless others. And they don't have the same expectations towards a curate that they would of a seasoned priest. It's a lot easier to treat a seasoned priest as a commodity than it is a curate.
How do you find these curates?
They're out there. You got to look for them. I think when you go to synods, the number one thing you can do is post a job for a curacy. You don't have to go on the trail. They'll find you. Um, and not everyone's ready to be a curate. For our church plant in Johnson City, I interviewed 14 people before we found Father Alex Marlowe. Um, so I mean, be choosy, but they are out there, and there's funding too. We got a grant to start our a regular curacy from Made to Flourish. They have a residency accelerator, curacy accelerator. Um, but yeah, I think if you keep your eyes open, um, you know, form a lot of relationships with people, and you won't not do it because you don't have curate candidate. That's not the reason why churches don't do this. Yeah.
Okay. And this is, of course, our conversation about how to be successful in creating a new church from scratch. And you know you'll be teaching Anglican church planting again in starting in January at Cranmer House. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
We're gonna, yeah, we'll be teaching this class. It's with the Dr. Joel West is on the trio of teachers. Also, Canon Michael Vinson of the REC Mid America Diocese, and I'll be on the team as well. And we're gonna teach it, I think, over 13 weeks of video content that we're giving, but then discussion based on that. just to help people build not only a strategy but an intuition about church planning. I often say that church planning is not intuitive, and so trying to help them make it more intuitive, make right calls, know what big mistakes are common. Um, and I think that starts in January, and I'm really looking forward to it. My greatest heart is to see others plant churches. I don't think I'm probably ever going to plant another church personally. I would have a lot of fun. I dream about it. I think my vocation is to help others do the work.
Okay, and you'd mentioned that it's a weekly format, so people have to fly to Dallas every week to take this class.
It's uh it's over Zoom. They can zoom on in. I think that the demand for it is wide, and um, so we wanted to make sure that people could gather without a plane or a plane flight every week. We also we have operated as an intensive, and I think we all agreed that one weekend is just too short a time, not to get the content across, but to train the intuition and to have people process it in a good way. So yeah, zoom in once a week, and I think you'll be really blessed. I think it's a really good course, mainly because of the other two men that are there.
Well, and your passion and energy, which we saw here today. So for those who are interested in the class, just go to cranmerhouse.org and look under academics, and there'll be a menu item for courses. You can look it up there. Well, Father Tony, it's been great. And I hope the people who are watching find this useful in reorienting themselves. If people say you talked about a coach or a mentor, if people are looking for a coach or a mentor, is that something that you do?
Uh, it can be. I I'm my work as a canon as a rector is pretty all engrossing, but um, if it's the right fit, I can take a year or two and help someone as a coach. Um, but Always Forward has a team of coaches that are amazing. And I would highly recommend them. I think that even if they have a different uh, tradition or place within the spectrum of the Anglican, tradition, I think that they still have a framework that is easily applicable to the people that are going to be watching this webinar. So, or this podcast. So, I really Always Forward is amazing. Uh, they really have spent so much time becoming experts in this. So I would recommend their training. Uh, I would recommend their assessment. I would highly recommend you never plant a church without their assessment, and then their coaching, with an emphasis on assessment and coaching, because I think that our class through Cranmer is going to be everything that Always Forward gives in the training. I think will have a place in the class, but then we get a lot more practical because we just have more time.
Well, great. Thank you for taking the time to share your experience and your insights with us. And with that, we'll conclude.
Thanks, Joel.